Anson Fredericks is a former executive at Anheuser-Busch who has said this. Now, take us back to the beginning, sir. Thank you so much for coming on. First of all, obviously, we denounce any sort of bullying. Someone having suicidal thoughts is very serious. That's terrible, and I do feel for that person. But was this not necessarily the best brand deal for Anheuser-Busch? What was the company like before DEI?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about Anheuser-Busch, like this is like the great American beer company. Think about Budweiser, it almost was American in a bottle. It stood for freedom, it stood for opportunity. And then Bud Light, which was an offshoot of Budweiser, became the largest beer brand in this country, particularly because it was apolitical as a brand. It was supposed to appeal to everybody. Democrats, Republicans, they all drank it because it was about sports, it was about music, it was about backyard barbecuing. And the problem with the whole DEI movement is they almost forced every single brand to adopt more of a very progressive view, like a company like Ben & Jerry's would. You know, Ben & Jerry's did a partnership with Dylan Mulvaney. I don't think anybody would bat an eye because Ben & Jerry's on their website, the ice cream makers, we use ice cream to advance a socially progressive mission. Dylan would have been probably a fine person for Ben & Jerry's, but for a brand like Bud Light, who never got involved in controversial issues, of which Dylan has been on the front line talking about gender affirmation care at the White House with Joe Biden, or talking about biological males competing against women in sports, it was just the wrong brand fit for Bud Light. And that was the problem, is this DEI movement forced all companies to adopt more of a social and progressive policies. And then you saw there was a big backlash when a lot of the consumers who drank Bud Light just wanted Bud Light to be a beer, not necessarily to be a political statement.
Yeah, the largest boycott ever, again, against a beer brand, Bud Light specifically, that I think was #1 and then dropped down to, I believe, number 16 right after this one moment. But it goes to a broader conversation about DEI, which you're very, very familiar with. In fact, you wrote an op-ed about this, so control room, if we can go to B05. This is in the New York Times, reading in part, but the massive corporate embrace DEI was always destined to fail, in large part because the movement was never well defined to begin with. It goes on, and now we see all these companies rolling back their DEI programs and initiatives. And Anson, if you wanted to just elaborate on that and perhaps what made you step up to write this op-ed and have this again printed in the New York Times, because you've been in this position and then you've watched this play out, and now here we are in March of 2025, and you've got hundreds of companies that have stepped away from this already.
Yeah, so you have to really trace the origins of the DEI movement. You trace it back to actually the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that says that corporations were not supposed to discriminate based off race, sexuality, gender, national identity, etc. And even at the time, the floor manager was Hubert Humphreys. He helped pass this bill, became Lyndon Johnson's VP. Said if this ever leads to, for example, quota systems, I'll eat my hat. That was one of his phrases. And over the last 5 years, this is exactly what sort of the DEI movement became. Diversity became about quota systems. You had to have hard quotas for how many people you were going to hire based off their race or their sex or their sexuality. Companies like Salesforce, companies like Coca-Cola, they implemented these quota systems. The equity piece became about no matter how hard you worked at a company, people were getting paid the same, or they had to get promoted the same way, again, based off race, sex, gender. And then really the inclusivity piece, it actually became about exclusivity. What was really interesting to me and eye-opening is I, for example, tried to do a partnership with Black Rifle Coffee Company, do a distribution agreement when I was at Anheuser-Busch. And I was told we couldn't do it because it was too politically charged with Black Rifle Coffee Company, since their mission was to serve people who love America and firefighters, police officers, military. But then all of a sudden, the same group that said we couldn't do a deal with Black Rifle Coffee Company was the same group that approved this partnership with Dylan Mulvaney. And I think that became the problem with the DEI movement. It became about quota systems. It became about forced equity. It actually excluded a lot of voices in corporate America. And ultimately, that's why it has failed. And so many companies are walking back because it's not leading to bottom line increases, and it's not helping in terms of creating just a work environment where everybody's welcome.
Information. Truth is freedom. Is Newsmax. It's real news for real people.